A positive mind begins with a definite purpose. Without purpose, the mind drifts. It wanders, chases distractions, clings to confusion, and reacts to circumstances rather than creating direction. But when the mind is anchored by a clearly defined purpose, everything begins to align. Thoughts become structured. Energy becomes focused. Doubt starts to fade because the mind now has a target to aim at, a reason to rise and a reason to fight. Most people live reactively, moving through life without a clear goal, hoping that something meaningful will fall into place. They waste their days wondering, worrying, waiting. But a positive mind cannot afford that luxury. A positive mind is built by intention, not chance. Purpose is what gives the mind a sense of meaning and movement. When you know exactly what you want, everything you encounter is filtered through that clarity. Every distraction becomes irrelevant. Every temptation becomes weak. Every obstacle becomes a test of your resolve, not a threat to your identity. A person without a definite purpose is easily swayed by other people's opinions. They get pulled into negativity, seduced by trends, influenced by fear. But when your purpose is strong, your mind becomes fortified. You're no longer searching for external validation. You're no longer depending on luck or approval. You are driven from within. Your vision becomes your fuel. And that internal fire creates a natural positivity, not the shallow kind that smiles through pain, but the deep kind that knows why the pain is worth it. Purpose gives birth to power. It silences the noise of self-doubt and overthinking. You stop asking, what if I fail? And start demanding, what do I need to do next? That shift in mindset, away from uncertainty and into action, is where positivity begins to grow. Because now you're not sitting in fear. You're moving with faith. You're not asking for direction. You've chosen your destination. And that choice begins to shape your identity. The mind starts to reflect whatever it repeats. And when it repeats a strong purpose, it begins to believe in it. That belief becomes the root of your confidence. That belief turns fear into fuel. It makes you immune to petty criticism, blind to meaningless noise, and deaf to anything that tries to convince you to stop. Because now your mind is aligned with something higher than comfort. It's anchored in purpose. It's aimed at something that matters. A positive mind is not built by avoiding negativity. It's built by having something so powerful to move toward that negativity no longer has room to grow. That something is your definite purpose. It's what gets you out of bed when motivation is gone. It's what keeps you disciplined when everything around you is chaotic. It's what builds emotional resilience, because you know your struggle is not wasted. Every setback becomes part of the mission. Every failure becomes feedback. Every delay becomes training. Without purpose, effort feels meaningless. But with purpose, even pain feels sacred. The positive thinker understands this. They don't need everything to be easy. They just need their why to be clear. Because once the mind knows what it's fighting for, it stops entertaining excuses. It stops needing comfort. It stops chasing approval. Instead, it locks in. It focuses. It commits. And through that commitment, the mind begins to reshape itself into a tool of strength, belief, and forward motion. Definite purpose is not just a habit. It is the foundation upon which all other habits are built. Until the mind knows where it's going, no amount of positivity can last. It will fade because it has no reason to endure. But once the mind is tied to a clear mission, positivity becomes natural. It becomes the default because the mind now has a reason to be strong, a reason to reject doubt, and a reason to keep moving no matter what. That is how a positive mind is born, not through empty affirmations or blind optimism, but through a clear, focused, non-negotiable purpose. One that pulls you forward even on the hardest days. One that sharpens your thoughts, aligns your energy, and gives your life meaning. The words you speak to yourself daily are not just sounds in your head. They are commands to your subconscious. The mind, especially when undisciplined, is a sponge. It absorbs whatever is repeated, whether it is empowering or destructive. This is why mastering self-talk is one of the most crucial habits of a positive mind. A weak mind will constantly repeat fears, regrets, and doubts. But a strong, positive mind is built through intentional repetition of strength, belief, and clarity. Every single day the mind is talking. Even in silence, it whispers beliefs. I'm not enough. What if I fail? No one cares. These phrases are not just thoughts. They're mental viruses. Left unchecked, they eat away at confidence. They form invisible chains that limit action and suppress potential. But self-talk is not fixed. It can be rewritten. And the person who learns to control their inner voice becomes immune to external noise. The person who speaks truth to themselves with power, with conviction, and with faith becomes unstoppable. This habit doesn't begin with loud declarations. It begins in quiet moments of self-awareness, recognizing the thought patterns that run on autopilot. The positive mind doesn't wait for motivation to strike. It speaks life into itself even when emotions are flat. It affirms progress even when results are not visible. It repeats strength when circumstances suggest weakness. That's not delusion. It's mental leadership. The habit of powerful self-talk is not optional for a positive mind. It's essential, because no matter how gifted or talented a person may be, if their inner voice is poisoned with self-doubt, they will sabotage their own growth. But if that voice becomes a source of power, it becomes impossible to stop their evolution. Discipline is the bridge between intention and transformation. Without it, even the strongest mindset collapses. A positive mind is not simply a byproduct of good thoughts. It is the result of repeated decisions to do what must be done, even when motivation is gone. Discipline is not exciting, it's not glamorous, but it is sacred. Because every time you act in alignment with your values instead of your emotions, you train your mind to follow strength over weakness. The undisciplined mind lives by how it feels. If it's tired, it quits. If it's afraid, it hesitates. If it's uncomfortable, it runs. This kind of mind may feel temporarily safe, but it will never be powerful. A positive mind is built when the body is tired, when the will is tested, when the excuse is tempting, and still the decision is made to move forward. That repeated action rewires the brain. That repeated effort reshapes identity. Over time, the individual stops seeing discipline as punishment and starts seeing it as freedom. Every positive habit in life, whether it's thinking clearly, speaking with confidence, or facing adversity with courage, requires discipline as its foundation. Without discipline, intentions remain fantasies. But with discipline, progress becomes inevitable. The positive mind knows this. It doesn't wait for the perfect mood. It doesn't search for comfort. It obeys what needs to be done. And through that obedience, it becomes sharper, stronger, and more focused than ever before. The truth is simple. You cannot build a positive mind if you allow yourself to be a slave to temporary emotions. Master discipline, and you master your destiny. Gratitude is not just a feeling, it is a mental frequency. It is the deliberate choice to focus on what is present rather than what is lacking. The positive mind is not built in the absence of problems. It is built in the presence of perspective. When you train yourself to see value in what you already have, your entire emotional state begins to shift. Fear begins to dissolve. Anxiety loses its grip, because gratitude shifts your focus from scarcity to strength, from helplessness to power. Most people never realize how much they already possess. They chase more, crave more, complain more, never realizing that this pattern of lack is poisoning their ability to think clearly. A mind that is constantly focused on what's missing can never be free. It becomes a victim to comparison, jealousy, frustration. But a mind trained in gratitude becomes bulletproof. It doesn't need perfect conditions to thrive. It sees every challenge as a chance to grow and every moment as a gift, not because it's blind, but because it has chosen power over pity. This habit is not about writing lists or saying thank you out loud. It's about rewiring the lens through which you see life. Every time you pause to appreciate your growth, your strength, your breath, your opportunities, you are strengthening your mind. You are teaching it to search for the good, even when the world tries to drown it out. And the more often you do this, the more naturally it becomes your default. Gratitude stops being a practice. It becomes who you are. And from that state of being, real power is born. The mind becomes what it's fed. And one of the most powerful ways to program the mind is through autosuggestion, deliberate, repeated instructions directed to the subconscious. Most people don't realize that their internal world is being shaped every single day, whether they take control of it or not. The mind doesn't resist repetition. It absorbs it. It believes whatever it hears enough times. This is why a weak mind is often the result of careless repetition, of fear-based thoughts, doubts, and limiting beliefs that were never challenged. But a positive mind is sculpted intentionally with precision, using autosuggestion as a daily tool of transformation. You don't rise to the level of your potential. You fall to the level of your programming. And if your internal programming is constantly replaying messages like, "I'm not ready, this is too hard," or "I'll never be enough," then no matter how talented you are, you'll be held back by invisible chains. Autosuggestion is the process of replacing those chains with commands of power. I am focused. I am capable. I am built for this. These aren't empty words, they are instructions. And the subconscious does not question what is repeated with conviction. It accepts it and begins to act upon it. The key is faith. Without belief, the words are meaningless. But when spoken with emotion, clarity, and consistency, those words begin to take root. Over time, the internal conversation changes. And once the conversation changes, the decisions change. And once decisions change, results follow. This is not magic, it's mental reprogramming. And the most successful, resilient, and driven minds on earth have mastered this art, whether they realize it or not. Autosuggestion is not about waiting to feel powerful. It's about speaking power into existence until your mind has no choice but to follow. A positive mind is not born from random inspiration. It is built brick by brick, word by word, belief by belief. The words you speak today become the life you live tomorrow. So speak with intention, speak with authority, and never forget, the subconscious mind is always listening. Make sure it hears something worth believing. Silence is not weakness. In fact, it is in silence that the strongest minds are formed. A positive mind doesn't require constant stimulation, noise, or validation. It thrives in stillness. Because in the absence of distraction, clarity rises. Most people fear silence because it forces them to face their own thoughts. But the individual who learns to embrace quiet reflection gains access to a level of mental strength the noisy world will never understand. Silence becomes the space where thoughts are refined, where truth is heard, and where power is cultivated. The world is addicted to speed and noise, constant scrolling, endless opinions, non-stop input. But a mind that is always reacting has no time to think. It becomes scattered, impulsive, emotional. The positive mind is the opposite. It is calm, it is deliberate, it doesn't rush, it thinks, it observes, it plans. In silence, the positive thinker separates what is real from what is noise. They don't get pulled into every conflict or seduced by every distraction. Their strength lies in their restraint. Silence creates awareness. When you sit in solitude, you begin to see your patterns, your weaknesses, your automatic thoughts. And awareness is the beginning of change. You can't change what you don't understand. The positive mind uses silence to study itself, not with judgment, but with precision. It asks questions most people run from. What am I avoiding? What belief is limiting me? What emotion is clouding my clarity? These answers don't come from external sources. They are found in quiet, in stillness, in the space where the mind is forced to face itself. A positive mind is not controlled by emotion. It controls emotion. This doesn't mean feelings are ignored. It means they are mastered. Emotional control is not suppression. It is leadership of the self. Every day, emotions rise. Anger, fear, jealousy, anxiety. But the difference between a weak mind and a powerful one is not the presence of these emotions, but the response to them. A positive thinker doesn't allow temporary feelings to dictate permanent actions. They feel everything, but they are moved by principle, not impulse. When you allow emotions to lead, decisions become unstable. Words are spoken in haste. Actions are taken in regret, and the mind becomes a battlefield of overreaction and guilt. But the disciplined mind pauses. It creates space between stimulus and response. It doesn't lash out. It listens. It doesn't collapse under pressure. It breathes. It understands that no emotion, no matter how intense, has the authority to define the moment. The positive mind is driven by clarity, not chaos. Emotional control is not coldness. It is strength under fire. It is the ability to stay grounded when others panic, to remain focused when others fall apart. It is the difference between reacting like a child and responding like a leader. And the mind that practices this habit becomes unshakable. It doesn't seek external calm. It creates it from within. It doesn't need circumstances to be perfect. It makes clear decisions even when everything around is in chaos. That is the power of emotional control. And without it, no positivity can last. But with it, there is nothing that can break the mind. It becomes still. It becomes sharp. It becomes unstoppable. Indecision is the enemy of progress. It weakens the mind, creates confusion, and opens the door to fear. But the habit of decisive thinking builds confidence, sharpens clarity, and fuels momentum. A positive mind does not hesitate when it knows the path. It chooses. It commits. It moves. Even when the outcome is uncertain, the act of deciding builds strength. Because the moment you make a clear decision, you reclaim control. You stop drifting and you start directing. Most people waste energy living in mental limbo, overanalyzing, doubting, second-guessing. They paralyze themselves with the fear of being wrong. But what they fail to understand is that indecision is a decision to remain stuck. It's better to make a choice and learn than to wait forever in fear. The positive thinker embraces this truth. They trust their judgment. They gather the necessary information, listen to their inner compass, and then act with boldness. They don't wait for certainty. They create it through action. Every time you delay a decision, you weaken your self-trust. The mind begins to believe it cannot rely on itself. But when you build the habit of making firm choices, that trust is restored. The mind starts to believe, when I say I'll do something, I do it. When I decide on a direction, I follow it. That belief becomes inner stability. That stability becomes confidence. And that confidence becomes the foundation of a deeply positive mindset. Persistence is the backbone of a positive mind. Without it, strength collapses under pressure, dreams fade at the first sign of resistance, and potential dies quietly. But with persistence, the mind becomes unstoppable. Not because it never struggles, but because it refuses to quit. The positive thinker understands that failure is not the end. It's a signal to adjust, not abandon. It's not about talent or luck. It's about staying in the fight when everyone else gives up. Most people start strong, but they don't finish. They fall in love with the idea of success, but walk away the moment it demands more from them than they expected. The positive mind is different. It expects the struggle. It understands that everything worthwhile requires endurance. And because it's not shocked by resistance, it doesn't crumble. It adjusts, it adapts, it learns, it keeps going. That is the essence of persistence, showing up over and over again, especially when there's no applause, no guarantee, no visible progress. Persistence is not stubbornness. It's resilience. It's the inner decision that says, I will not be defined by how I feel today. It's the strength to keep showing up when it's boring, when it's hard, when it's slow. Because a positive thinker is not addicted to instant results, they are committed to long-term transformation. They don't need it to be easy. They just need to know it's worth it. And with every step forward, they build proof. Proof that they are not the kind of person who gives up. A positive mind is not aimless. It is always locked onto a target. It doesn't wake up wondering what to do with the day. It wakes up with intention. Goal-directed thinking is not just about ambition. It's about alignment. When the mind is tied to a clear outcome, distractions lose their grip. Temptations lose their appeal. Every action, every thought, every decision is filtered through the lens of purpose. That kind of clarity creates power. It simplifies. It sharpens. It energizes. Without goals, the mind drifts. It gets pulled into things that don't matter, caught up in other people's agendas, weighed down by small worries. But when a goal is present, clear, meaningful, and emotionally charged, the mind begins to operate on a different level. It no longer reacts. It strategizes. It no longer wanders. It aims. Even obstacles become part of the process. Setbacks don't derail the positive thinker. They reinforce the necessity of discipline and fuel the desire to push harder. This habit isn't about setting a goal once and forgetting it. It's about living with that goal every day, thinking about it, speaking about it, planning around it, adjusting for it. The mind that does this becomes nearly invincible because now it has a reason to say no to distractions, a reason to keep going when it's tired, a reason to elevate every part of life. Goals give the mind purpose, and purpose repeated with focus becomes power. A positive mind is not only defined by what it accepts, but also by what it refuses to tolerate. Negative influence is poison. It comes in many forms: people, media, environments, conversations, and it doesn't always scream. Sometimes it whispers. It disguises itself as sarcasm, doubt, or casual pessimism. But over time, it seeps in, corrupts your perspective, and starts to shape your thoughts. The positive thinker understands that protecting the mind is a non-negotiable habit, because whatever surrounds you shapes you. Most people underestimate how deeply they're being influenced. They absorb complaints without realizing it. They adopt fears that aren't even theirs. They begin to lower their standards just to feel accepted. But a mind that is serious about growth builds boundaries. It is selective. It does not allow just anyone access to its energy. It doesn't entertain drama. It doesn't argue with negativity. It walks away, not out of fear, but out of strength, because energy is everything. And the positive mind knows it cannot afford to be drained by people who are committed to being stuck. This habit becomes a filter for life. Every relationship, every conversation, every piece of content must pass the test. Does this build me or does it break me? If it breaks you even a little, you remove it, without apology, without delay, because the mind is sacred, and anything that weakens it must be eliminated. A positive thinker doesn't just build power, they protect it, ruthlessly, relentlessly, without compromise. That's how they stay focused, elevated, and unstoppable. Fear is natural, but faith is a choice. Every day, the mind is presented with two voices, one that warns, doubts, and hesitates, and one that believes, acts, and trusts. The positive mind doesn't ignore fear, it replaces it. It recognizes that fear is a signal, not a sentence. It sees fear for what it is, a mental projection of a future that hasn't happened. And instead of letting that projection take control, the positive thinker chooses faith. Because faith creates motion, fear paralyzes. Fear asks, what if I fail? Faith responds, what if I grow? Fear says, you're not ready. Faith says, you'll become ready. Fear looks for reasons to stop. Faith looks for reasons to start. This shift doesn't happen overnight. It is built, trained, practiced. And it begins with the refusal to let uncertainty dictate identity. A positive mind builds faith by choosing courage in the small moments, by walking into discomfort, by taking action while afraid, and by trusting that strength grows in motion. Faith isn't blind optimism. It is focused belief. It is grounded in purpose, strengthened by discipline, and fueled by repetition. And when the mind is full of faith, it becomes immune to fear-based thinking. It doesn't chase validation. It doesn't need guarantees. It moves forward even when nothing is certain, because it believes that something greater is being built through every struggle, every step, every season. The world will always try to feed your fears. That's easy. That's familiar. But a positive mind doesn't take the easy path. It builds faith like a shield by feeding the mind with vision, with truth, with possibility. It declares that no fear, no doubt, no uncertainty will steal the future it is committed to creating. That kind of faith isn't passive, it's powerful. It doesn't wait, it creates. And once that habit becomes consistent, fear no longer controls the direction of your life. Faith does. The mind forgets what it doesn't repeat. You can hear the most powerful truth once, and within days, it fades into the background. That's why a positive mind is not built by occasional inspiration. It's built by daily mental repetition. Over and over again, the thoughts of strength, belief, and clarity are impressed onto the subconscious, not because it's convenient, but because it's necessary. Repetition is how the mind learns. It's how it locks in a new identity and makes it real. Daily mental repetition is how you fight back against doubt. It's how you rewire patterns that have been there for years. It's how you build confidence that no setback can erase. This habit is simple, but it's powerful. And the ones who master it don't just think differently, they live differently. They don't rely on motivation. They don't wait for external validation. They feed their mind the thoughts that align with who they are becoming, even before the results show up. Over time, the repetition becomes reality. What was once just an affirmation becomes belief. What was once a goal becomes identity. And what was once just a vision becomes a lifestyle. That's how the positive mind evolves. Not with force, but with consistency. Not with hype, but with quiet, focused, daily mental work. because the mind, when properly trained, will follow whatever you teach it. And once that teaching is repeated enough, it becomes unshakable.